don't even know how to start this episode.
It's perfect.
Oh,
This is
man.
exactly how you should start the recording.
This is how we should start
great.
this. Yeah. So no editing. This is all unfiltered, right?
Yeah.
So welcome to the Restoring Our City podcast, where we have truly candid conversations on today's topics to help connect our community. And I'm with Jeswin Thomas, and we started this off laughing because we try to do some prep on these episodes.
Yeah.
But Jeswin, why are you hysterically laughing? And I can't even get the intro out.
When you say we're doing today's topics is about looking back. And literally, Joby and I have so many random memories from the past that are flooding here, especially when you're talking about maturity, just thinking about how immature we were. The one thing I did want to bring up is, it's not the story that I'm going to bring up, but there was once where we both went to India for a mission trip in Delhi, right? And we wrote down an entire book of just random dumb quotes that people said on this trip. And what's so funny is sometimes we still remember the quotes and we have no idea what the context is. And that's exactly what just happened. We said a quote that said, put some rims on it. I'm not going to give any context to what happened there, but we remember the phrase, but not the context.
Right. Yeah. All these inside jokes, probably not helping the podcast. However, this is why it's relevant, because we, like you mentioned, we are taking a look back, but not just because we want to be nostalgic, but we do want to reflect on spiritual growth. And the reason why we bring that up is because on our Instagram about a week or two, I can't remember when, we actually put out a question to say, hey, what are some topics that you, our listeners, are interested in hearing us talk about? And so one great comment, and I'll butcher the exact comment, Jeswin, I know you have it somewhere, but it was just talking about our personal stories and how we've evolved in our spiritual growth and maybe even our testimonies. And while we probably won't have time to go into our personal testimonies, I thought it would be interesting to talk about spiritual growth and maybe the growing pains, because a lot of us have had these thoughts and stories, maybe immature moments in our Christian faith, and then things evolve. And really, how did those things evolve? And what are the aspects of our faith that actually evolved? I think that's really interesting to explore. So shout out to our listeners for throwing out some really good ideas.
Yeah.
But just thinking about it, Jeswin, where were you 10 years ago and what were you doing? Like, can you just harken back to that time and what moment in your life, where were you?
10 years ago to this date, no, I'm just kidding. 10 years ago is actually the year that I graduated college and I was starting my career. And so right around August would have been, 4 months into working in. So I probably am still figuring things out. All I discovered at that point is being an adult means you wear dress socks to the office. And so I needed to buy some. So that's where I was at 10 years ago, Joby. How far into your career were you at that point?
Oh, pretty well off into my career. But not to, spring my age here, but I do remember 10 years ago because in August, there was a picture of you actually at our engagement. So my now wife, we actually got engaged at the beginning of August. And like that came up on my Google Photos and the memories of like, wow, it's 10 years ago. And our wedding anniversary is later this year. But anyway, 10 years ago, like starting off like serious like life change, right? With married life. And it's kind of crazy to think about like where I was spiritually there and like even how family dynamics have changed and involved me, right? But yeah, it's interesting, right? Like we actually grow, we see things differently. Who I was back then is not who I am now. And I think for the better, I'm hoping. But I want to dive into that, right? Like, especially for those of our listeners who are hearing this and maybe are in a spot where they're probably wrestling with something and they don't know if they should grow or stay in the status quo, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk. Like, what are some of the things that you feel that has really shifted from maybe not even just 10 years ago, but like where you were as a younger Christian? How are you different, or are you exactly the same?
Oh, man, I am definitely not exactly the same. But I think the biggest thing that I think has shifted for me is, when we're growing up, sometimes we think about, if we commit a sin or we do something wrong, we end up on God's plan B. And I always think about, oh my gosh, there's this idea of a will of God somewhere, and I am on this earth meant to discover what it is, and every decision I make plays into, am I on plan A? Am I on plan B? And if you really
Hmm.
think about it, I was thinking 10 years ago, man, I got to find this thing. And I think, over time, just knowing the word deeper and just being in different healthier spots, you just discover, you know what? We're always on God's plan A because he knows what we're doing from beginning to the end. Otherwise, probably be on like plan ZZZ at this point.
Right,
But
right.
it's not this big mysterious cloud where we're chasing, but it's just discovering God's will over time as
Yeah.
he speaks to us and just learning how to walk with him until, he says something more specifically if he does. So that's been definitely one area that I've definitely involved in. But how about yourself?
Yeah, I feel like there's been a lot of shifts because just growing up in a Christian home, it's almost like, yeah, I understand these core principles, and I don't think I've really deviated like in this big theological way. However, there's ways and aspects of my faith that I can see moments of my life where I'm like, wow, this really shifted. So, like, I think, man, 2010 ish. I remember this so clearly, and I may have shared this before, but like, I was a Christian and even doing like stuff with rock way back when. But like when this person wrote this diagram of this cross chart on a napkin, I was at a steak and shake. Okay. We
Mm,
all went to like some Christian concert, went to eat afterwards, and I went to the steak and shake, and there's a bunch of us, just like any Indian person listening now. If you've been to a Denny's with like 25 Indian people, it's kind of, or a steak and shake, right? Late at night, that's kind of how it is. And just visualize that setting. But we're all like having these deep conversations because we just came from a Christian concert. And one of my friends came and said, "Hey, did you know about this like small group curriculum? It's called the Gospel Centered Life." And he started to explain it to me. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. But it really didn't plant any seeds in me until he took the back of a napkin and he drew this chart.
mm,
And it was like, hey, this is you when you get saved. And this is what happens. You grow in your awareness of who God is. And then he put this line down where it says, now you're growing in your awareness of how sinful you are.
mm.
And the only thing that bridges the gap is the cross. And he's like, that's why it's so central to everything we do. And I was just like, and
Wow.
I cannot tell you. He like sent me this 8 lesson small group curriculum. That was in 2010. It's 2025. I still send that curriculum. I sent it to somebody like a couple months ago. And I looked at my email, and every time I send somebody the curriculum, I look at my email thread because I'm just forwarding this PDF. And I look at back over the past like 15 years, dude. That's how much it shaped my life
Wow.
because it really made me focus on, wow, the gospel. And it really made things not like completely change my theology, but in some ways it kind of did, right? It
Yeah.
made me really hyper focus
Hmm.
on the cross. So that's just a pivotal moment in my life that I'll never forget, you know?
It's awesome. What a great
Yeah.
story. I was trying to think about, as you were talking, just thinking about my own pivotal moments, just like that. And maybe I don't have like specific moments or diagrams that I think it's truly changed you, but it's just been being part of different communities. I think sometimes when you're born and brought up in a certain community, you tend to think, oh my gosh, this is like the pinnacle of Christianity, right? Everything out from here is just below the mountaintop. But you end up experiencing different settings, different environments, different denominations, different just people and places, and you start discovering, man, like the diversity within the body of Christ is such a beautiful thing. And I feel
Yeah.
like I've gained just something from being in different places that's definitely shaped me. So it's almost like a different level of evolution, right? Maybe not a singular moment, but a progressive series of communities, honestly.
Is there something about that though? Because as you mentioned that, I think about the churches and maybe the communities that we grew up in. I know I grew up Penty, and like I remember clearly, like, we never really intermingled with other denominations or other churches.
Hmm.
Even like people within our denomination, it would always be like, hey, we want to host this like event, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, let's make sure every single other church cancels their meeting because we don't want to like step on toes. Or we couldn't even get everybody together because we
Hmm.
were scared of like maybe absorbing some traditional belief or something. I don't know. It's kind of crazy. Um, I remember going to the Gospel Coalition conference, and I was going one weekend, and I was involved at church, the church that we grew up in, doing music or whatever, teaching Sunday school. And I happened to be in the kitchen area and like getting coffee. And then one of the aunties was like, "Oh, I heard you're not going to be here next weekend. Where are you going?" Like, "I'm going to this conference." She's like, "Wait, that's not some Indian Malayali Pentecostal conference. Like, why are you going to that?" I'm like, "Well, well, my friend, he was actually the director of operations for the Gospel Coalition at the time." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to go there." You know, the first thing they told me, they're like, "Isn't he Baptist? Why are you going to that?" And I was like, "Wait a minute. Like, is that your response? It's like, because he's Baptist? Like, do you care about like what they're talking about at this it's the Gospel Coalition that's the name of the conference. It's like you're trying to dissuade me from going to this thing because you think somebody's Baptist. It's I don't know, man. Those are some of the things that I feel like push people away from embracing other communities or
Yeah.
even just expanding our knowledge, you know?
But even more confusing that, so as you were just saying that, Joey, I think so this is one of the most confusing experiences I've ever had in my life. So sometimes growing up Malu Pentecostal, especially, you think that it's because we have all of our theology right that the gifts of the Holy Spirit manifests itself in a Pentecostal environment, right? And so sometimes we think, oh my gosh, if we go anywhere else, why would you, right? Like we got the giftings,
Exactly.
man. When I went down to U of I for the first time, I ended up joining a Korean Presbyterian church. And so it was so funny, there was one time where we're having these revival meetings on campus. And of course, there's prayer meetings leading up to it. And you see the manifestations of the gifts of the Spirit. Like they're speaking in tongues, there's some prophecy, all this stuff is happening. I'm like, man, what a crazy, awesome community. And then the following Sunday, they did an infant baptism. And I was in the most confused state I've ever been. It's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? On one side, y'all speaking in tongues. On the second time, you're baptizing babies. Like something's off somewhere, right? Like there's no way the manifestations of the gifts can be happening in a community like this. And man, I mean, that's definitely a moment that shaped my thinking for sure. But when, man, just to explore deeper and be like, you know what? I was so maybe legalistic or framing my
Yeah.
thoughts as like the absolute correct way to think about things that I never actually took a good look. I'm like, why do you think differently? Right? Like maybe I have misperceptions of your theology. And at the end of the day, now I'm kind of in camp that just is like, as long as I don't believe it's unbiblical, I'm not gonna be out here and say, hey, you guys are wrong or right. Because there's just so much
Yeah.
I feel like I need to learn, unlearn, constantly evolving, and just being willing to say, I'm willing to be wrong, right? Like I don't know how wrong I
Yeah.
am. I don't know where I'm wrong, but when I find it, you best believe I'm gonna change it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, see, I think that's the big part of it because we tend to think that we're completely correct in every single aspect of our faith until we start to explore and experience new things.
Yeah.
So maybe to even take that a step deeper, like what made you even have the courage to do that, right? Like if you were so maybe sheltered in an experience, but like what made you want to go out and even explore? Hey, going off to college and I'm gonna join this other church, right? Like that's
Yeah.
completely out of the norm.
Well, on one side, it's where I find community, right? Within that church was Indie Christian Fellowship, led by Pastor Tony down in Atlanta, Georgia. So if you're looking for a church, go down there. So shout out to him.
Yeah.
But I think part of the thing that really put me at odds with one another, I think, is we sometimes are so maybe heady with how we think about things. We're kind of up here thinking all that we have to cross every T, dot every I, and when we get that all correct, then nothing else sort of like matters. And sometimes we're
Yeah.
so drawn to giftedness, right? Like the perception of maturity is you're so gifted. But the reality is like, man, like when I saw this community in college that maybe I didn't grow up, being in a Presbyterian sort of environment, but experiencing that in college and understanding things like, oh, this is actually how we sort of love one another. This is actually what confessing our sins in grace
Yeah.
looks like. There was such a difference, and it made such a market reaction on my own Christian thinking and living in my own like life that I'm like, hey, you know what? I can't deny what I am experiencing in this different community, and therefore I'm not gonna just dip out and leave it. It's definitely enriching me, helping me grow. So why would I just leave it just because I don't think it's cross every T and I based on how I grew up? So that's maybe where I was at.
Yeah.
It's definitely an evolving statement, maybe. But Joby, I don't know if you've had different experiences. from
No, I
that. I
think
don't know
it's
if you've been part of a different community that's like, hey, this is definitely different from what I grew up in, but you know what? Like, I'm willing to put myself out there.
yeah, and maybe I haven't had that to the extreme, but I loved it when you went to college and you actually invited me to come down to Revival and like
Yeah.
I drove down and like got to see your college campus and like just all the people your age who were like on fire for God. And I'm like, whoa, this is a completely different culture, to completely different context. And I got to witness that firsthand. So thanks for bringing up that memory. That was fun times. But it was such a unique context. And I think for me, just starting to even when we started rock, like I think one of the first events that we did was making it open even cross denominationally. I think we did a battle of the bands. So if you go on YouTube and you start to scroll to the really, really old videos, there's some really grainy videos out there. But we invited everybody and we didn't care what denomination you're from, right? And that's how we got to know a lot of our mutual friends. And there's like a lot of people that now I look back and all the relationships over the years, I'm like, wow, I met you for the first time at an event that we like hosted. And there's so many different partnerships that we've done over the years. And I feel like if we never did that to kind of put ourselves out there, I wouldn't have made those friendships, wouldn't
Mhm.
have been able to make some impacts. And like, I remember fundraisers that we've done over the years. It's like, wow, we like built some really good relationships. And if we got hung up on the minor theological differences, you would be missing out on the major impacts that you can do
Mhm.
as a bigger community. And that's what I love about just like that exposure.
Yeah.
Um, but is there something there that like communities are holding us back from or like causing us not to grow? Because that sounds like a major area of growth, just getting exposed to different people.
Well, just like you said, I mean, you kind of laid it out there, right? Like, if we're willing to sort of make sure our majors are correct, but willing to let the minors be secondary, I think a lot of times we have to learn what is a major and what is a minor, right? Like,
True, true.
literally, there's been times, like you said, someone said, aren't they Baptist? And that was the line of demarcation of saying, that's such a high thing, bro. Like, you can't be with Baptists. Therefore, like, don't go to the Gospel Coalition. God, this is ridiculous. First off, who is that Andy? We need to bring them on this podcast. But anyway, I digress. Going back, but learning like what is the majors and what is the minors, right? Like, is denomination enough of a major? It might be for some people, but then how do you reflect, what does it mean to be part of like the entire body coming together, right? Like, what is a universal church then? Is it just you and your denomination and your group of people?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. So then, therefore, what is a major and minor? I think Joby and I would probably agree on this. You correct me if I'm wrong. Is, do we have the gospel correctly? Do we believe that it is, by grace through faith that we are able to receive the free gift of God through Christ's sacrifice and by grace alone, right? Do we have that piece correct? We could argue on like the smaller things
Yeah.
outside of that, but for me, I think that's just my bar, right? Like, if we can agree on that, we can squabble over some of the little things, but it shouldn't hold us back from coming together to accomplish some beautiful things for the glory of God and really display to
Yeah.
the world this is what unity and diversity sort of looks like. But correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if you have a higher bar than
No, no,
that.
you completely agree with that. And I think just maybe circling back to the theme of this episode too about like our growing pains. Yeah, we've had some personal growth areas that have shifted us from kind of these baby Christians and hey, this is because I grew up this way to like really owning our faith and like to the point where we're like, hey, this is so important to me. I'm still going to continue to explore and challenge myself. And the reason I want to circle back to like the theme is there's probably somebody listening who's wrestling with some of these theological ideas, right?
Hmm.
And they're probably wrestling with like, should I follow this? Why am I Protestant? Right? Why am I in this denomination? Or maybe I've had some doubts. Actually, one moment that I think about a lot when I have ever had a doubt in my faith is back at our old church, and I was in Sunday school.
Hmm.
And you know who my Sunday school teacher was?
Hmm.
My dad. My dad was my Sunday school teacher.
Okay.
And he was very strict, obviously. Could not be late with the coffee or whatever, like when you stroll in. But I remember one lesson, and it was weird because he's my dad, like teaching us. And then somebody else in the class asks my dad, have you ever had a doubt about your faith?
Hmm.
And like you hear your dad explain to all of us, maybe we were in high school, And he was like, yeah, I totally doubted my faith. And that was just like crazy for me to hear it from my dad. Like my dad, actually, he's probably like the strongest prayerful person that I know, right? Like,
Yeah,
especially like he's always Sunday morning,
absolutely.
always fasting Sunday, like always praying. Even if he comes over to my house now and my parents stay at my house, I hear them like praying at like 6
Yeah.
a.m. You know what I mean? It's just those disciplines. And then he tells me, like, yeah, I doubted my faith.
Hmm.
And like, but then he said, I embraced that doubt and it's okay to embrace the doubt. And that concept blew my mind because I'm like, wait a minute, I can wrestle with God, you know? And I
Yeah.
think there's like a Tim Keller clip that was floating around on Instagram and it was like, well, Job was fighting with God and you can hear his prayers and he's really fighting with God. And what was the difference between him and his friends? It was because he was praying.
Hmm.
It was because he was fighting, but he was fighting in prayer.
Hmm.
And it was just like relationship. And man, like I didn't know it was okay to doubt. And I think that's what sprung me forward to say, yeah, if I do have a question theologically, am I still going to wrestle through it with God, right? Like
Yeah.
instead of just trying to throw him out and try to explore something else and substitute, you know?
Yeah. That's
Um,
good.
but I think all that to say, there's probably ways that we have become spiritually mature, but that's such an ambiguous term.
Yeah.
You know, like, are we all of a sudden spiritually mature because we wrestled through these things and now we have all these great friends across denominations? I don't think so, right?
Yeah.
But I do want to not just to have our take on it, right? But what does the Bible actually say?
Hmm.
So I know we were talking about this before. We always kind of jot some notes down, but I think there's a passage that we wanted to reference here, which is 1 Corinthians 13, which is a really famous wedding passage. We're kind of in
Hmm.
the summer wedding season. I'm sure you've heard it a million times already. Um, but later down in the passage in verse 11, it says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. So, kind of talks a little bit about what we did as a child, but now we've grown up in this kind of spiritually mature sense, right? What's kind of your take on hearing that verse and just like the Bible's take on spiritual maturity?
Yeah, just for some context here, I mean, it's the love passage, right? So I think most of us have definitely heard this. But really, whoever wrote Corinthians, I'm hoping it's Paul, but don't quote me on that. When he was looking at, oh, it's definitely Paul. He was about to slap someone at the beginning of this
Oh, yeah.
second letter. But anyway, I digress. Paul is saying, look, there is this comparison between giftedness and at the same time, this church is, thriving with the gifts. Oh my gosh, like people are serving, people are like doing things, there's manifestations coming down. And yet he's like, guys, you're missing the point, right? The entire point of all this is to love one another. That's actually the
Yep.
true marker of maturity here. So, with this reasoning between, I feel like giftedness versus like godliness, or maybe some of the manifestations of the extraordinary gifts of the Spirit versus just the fruits of the Spirit, Paul is saying, guys, like how you act with one another is actually a bigger marker of maturity than anything else. So, that's sort of how I'm reading it. I don't know if you have a different take on that, though.
Yeah, no, it's like as you bring that up, it's so interesting to hear what spiritual maturity should look like and then what the perception is from the church, right? Like sometimes a worldly perception of what's being spiritually mature is completely different, right? There's this article that I was reading about a person who grew up in a hyper charismatic church and then they started to write down some false views on spiritual maturity.
Hmm.
And some things that she wrote were, and not that all these things are bad, but these are the signs that somebody might be spiritually mature, but in a completely negative way. Possessing spiritual gifts like speaking in tongues or prophecy, receiving direct personal revelations from God, being emotionally expressive during worship, like crying, wailing, or kneeling, um, being perceived as one who carries a special anointing or grace. Like all of those things sound oddly familiar, right? With a church might be like, hey, wow, look at that person. They're always having their hands up and like deeply emotional in worship, right? And it's just like that person must be spiritually mature,
Hmm.
right? And I think that's such a false picture and maybe false expectation and a standard that we set, especially in churches that maybe we've grown up in, that that person is spiritually mature because of the way they're outwardly behaving or what we perceive as gifts, right? Instead
Yeah.
of love, like the focus, right?
Well, even on top of that, more than maybe just the charismatic movements outside of the charisma, you think about, again, we speak about this every couple episodes and people that have fallen recently. It's some of the most intellectually brilliant teachers that you can think of that are caught up in something, and it's almost like
Yeah,
a huge portion of them that might be flooding to your mind at the moment. And there's this again question of like, well, you sound so eloquent, but
yeah,
man, given what happened, maybe you're not as mature as the words that you're saying. And again, it just goes back to this character, this love, the fruits that should be exhibited, right? From the spirit that seems to be the bigger marker of maturity than
yeah,
anything else.
yeah. And I think that's a great way to put it because we might look at those people and say, wow, look at how eloquent they are, how intelligent they are. They're so well versed in the scripture. That must be a level that I should aspire to get to. But that's not really what we should aspire to get to, right? We should
Mhm.
be aspiring to be exhibiting the fruit of the spirit, right? And
Yeah.
all of those characteristics instead of like head knowledge. And I think that's probably where I'm sure many of our listeners could relate, right? Like you feel down in the dumps where there's this comparison game that we play or we find ourselves in like, wow, look at how great that person is. Somebody like, sometimes I'll post like pictures of my kids, right? Like on Instagram and they do the silliest things or whatever. And like I remember somebody messaged me, they're like, oh man, you're such a great dad. I'm like, how
Dude,
do
you
you
are.
know that I love being a dad, don't get me wrong, but like how do you know I'm such a great dad? Because I was like, I posted a funny video of my kids, like I made them laugh. But do you know how it was funny though that week? Because that week, just to be completely transparent, I've been losing my temper with my kids, and maybe I'm just getting worked up. But like every night, they're just getting it, getting at me, and like testing my patience. And I've been like yelling at them,
Yeah.
and it was like really stressing, like my wife, and like I was so mad, man. I was just not being a good dad, totally yelling at them, and then I get this message, and I'm like, bro, you have no idea how much I've like failed in that specific role that you think I'm excelling at, you know?
Yeah.
And I think there's this outside picture of who we are and the comparison and social media is fake and all that kind of stuff. I understand all that. However, I think even in spiritual maturity, we might fall into these like actual traps of thinking what being spiritually mature is and aspire to do something that's not really called of us, right?
Yeah,
Um,
but like you said, like there's experiences that we have in our lives that really draw out like that. It's almost like, hey, are you living according to the standard that you're thinking, right? Like, are you actually exhibiting what you perceive to be reality? And sometimes you realize you're not in alignment with it, even for good things, right? I mean, I'll give an example from my life, and I'm hoping all of us, as we're thinking about spiritual maturity, we're thinking of ways like, hey, this is how we used to be, and maybe you went through some painful experiences, maybe you made some mistakes, and hopefully you're not making that same mistake again. I don't know why it is, but every single time I end up in a church, there ends up being a conflict. So please don't invite me to your place if you want to have a solvent place at the end of this. But
we've been
I
to like
digress.
two churches together.
Yeah, I know, right? I don't know what it
Maybe it's
is.
my fault. I
Problems.
don't know.
Anyway, there was once when I really disagreed with a decision that was made by our pastor back in the day, and that led to a phone call where we both sort of a very heated, escalated conversation, and um, led to some like painful words being exchanged at that point. But I also realized in that moment, like, man, I didn't do anything to sort of think through what I was gonna say, have a structure, and really let the emotions sort of dictate the way that conversation went, rather than the content of what we were trying to talk about there. And so definitely went south. Didn't end up well at all. Well, guess what? A couple of years later, similar conflict happened in church, and this time, one of the ways that I try to go about it is like, hey, I realized the last time I had a conflict, it didn't go so well. So what should I do now? Sort of typed it all out, right? Like, this is exactly what I'm thinking. These are my concerns. I sent it to my small group leaders, one of which included Joby, and they sort of read it. It's like, hey, tone looks good. I don't think it could be misconstrued anyway. I CC'd them and all of our church eldership and sent it as an email just so that there was eyes on it. It's not happening in the dark. It's been vetted, but it was just one of those moments where I'm like, hey, this is actually how I do want to handle disagreements in the future, because guess what, you are going to disagree with the ways that churches might do things. You might have disagreements with leadership, but how we handle those things goes back to, are you being more spiritually mature in even the ways that you do disagreements and handle conflict, and make sure that you're doing it in the most loving way possible. So that's just definitely for me just one of the ways that I'm like, hey, I believe I've grown a little bit in that area.
Yeah. No, and I finally remember those times. But it's one of those things where like you learn from a really tough situation,
Hmm.
right? And now you're confronted with another really tough situation, and now you respond differently. And so maybe it's like how we handle conflict, maybe how we handle wrestling with the doubts in our faith. There's like so many aspects of spiritual growth that could occur, but it's you notice that there's like a way that we handle it once and then we handle it differently the second
Hmm.
time because we're growing. And it's
Yeah.
not just because want to be perceived as something different, right? Like I remember when you wrote that letter, it's like because you wanted to make sure you weren't your words weren't misconstrued and that you're being very articulate, but the whole overarching reason was because you cared,
Mm.
right? And it's because you cared about the church and cared about like the path going forward. And I think that's like a fundamental lesson in maturity too. Like we're not doing this for um awareness of who we are or to tout ourselves. It's like no, because I really care about the concepts. And I think that's where even exploring our faith and wrestling with your faith, maybe this even goes back to some of these conversations on deconstruction, right? Like people who are really trying to explore their faith, but why are they doing it? Is it because you're really angry with the status quo or a party or a movement, or are you really fundamentally trying to get closer to who God is and like
Yeah.
understanding who Christ is, right? Uh,
100%.
yeah, I think that's really interesting. There's probably listeners out there who are thinking about some of these things, and you probably think you're spiritually mature, but you've got a long ways to go. And I'm sure there's like different aspects of your life. I know, like when I got married, and then when I got kids, it's like one of the like the way I look at my faith, and maybe even the appreciation of who God is, understanding like relational dynamics completely mind-boggling. I always knew God was a father to me, but now that I am a father, it's like, whoa, I see it differently. Not that it makes it
Mm.
better, just like I see it differently, right?
Yeah.
Um, like I'm just thinking about this, Jasmine, like for the people who are like listening now, and they're like in some of these boats, they're like, wow, Jeswin, Joby, you guys grew like this. This is like great. This is all positive stuff, right? Um, but like what about the people who are still like wrestling with things and like struggling to grow? How do we like tell them to like what should they expect, right? How can we like prep them on the journey that they're probably going to be taking, right? Like what does maturity look like? What practical steps could they take? Like if you had to like think about
Mhm.
your disciplines 10 years ago, 15 years ago to like how you are as a Christian now, like how has
Mhm.
that evolved practically?
Yeah, I would say practically, I mean, you kind of laid it out there too. I think part of realizing how immature you actually are comes with being placed in places where you have to exhibit maturity. When you take up, you're no longer just an attendee or a participant, and you take that chance to say, hey, you know what, like, I'll answer this calling to even do kids ministry. Well, guess what? You want to find out your
Yeah.
immaturity? God's going to use that serving opportunity as a sanctifying tool. You want to figure out how there's buried things? Get married, right? In your character. Someone else is going to figure out what that is, right?
Right.
You're talking about being a father now, different level of realizing how immature you are. Even on this podcast, right? Some of the things that we say, we really have to think about, man, who's listening? How's it going to be and not even misconstrued? How is it going to be just received? We've definitely
Yep.
received messages over the years of people being, questioning, being angry, being reactionary. Positives, all abound, but even the ways that we're thinking about how we structure and articulate, it's when we're put in positions that require a level of maturity that you almost start realizing, oh my gosh, I am so immature. But I also say
Yeah.
this just that we're not all left hopeless. Our spiritual maturity is not in our hands completely, right? Yes, we have, by the power of the Holy Spirit, we have to submit our flesh to his leading. But at the end of the day, God's the author and finisher of our faith. And really, when we think about what is the will of God? The Bible itself tells us what that is. It is your spiritual sanctification to make sure that you are becoming more like Christ. And that is God's goal. So all of these things that you take, right? Like my admonition for practical steps is just step up, serve, lead something, and you're gonna realize how immature you are very quickly. But don't take that as a discouragement because that is exactly how God is sanctifying you to become more and more like Christ.
I mean, I think you said it perfectly. And even just the aspect of saying that we're immature, right? Because now I think about like as a young person, a young Christian, like if I had to look and say, who do you think is the most spiritually mature person at our church
Mhm.
or in our circles, right? You'd probably look at the pastor, you'd probably look at the people who are attending church sitting in the front, always the first to lead the Psalms or do the Psalms reading or volunteer, right? Like, I think there's truths to that. But then as I've grown older, it's not the prominence of the position or the talent, it's the character, right?
Mm.
It's like, man, I know this person's a spiritually mature person. Like now, when I go to church, I go to a pretty big American church and I don't know everybody. I can't know everybody. But there's aspects of people like in their interactions with me that I'm like, wow, this person's been around a long time and is a spiritually mature Christian. I've had people who are like 60s, 70s, like just preach at me all the time. But then there's like the person who's really humble, like maybe just like the greeter at church or does something like not a hugely visible role, but like the way we talk, it's like, wow, I can see the fruit of the spirit come out of you because they're always humble. They're always like self-sacrificing. They're always putting you ahead of them, like always willing to like meet you where you are. It's like those attributes of a person is what tells me that you're spiritually mature. And my pastor was actually talking about this today. He's like, man, there's people I've known in the congregation for like 50 years and they would be faithful attendees, but I don't see them grow at all. But then you see the person who just became a Christian, recently and are completely on fire because they know where they've come from and
Mm.
like how amazing this grace is, right? So I think it's like character over talent, right?
Yeah, but
Uh,
even as you were, just talking about those people that are, just so aware the character over the talent, again, it goes back to what you started this all off with, that diagram, the growing awareness of your sins and like the growing awareness of like God's grace, right? Like I'm always reminded of
yeah,
a quote that's very similar to it, right? It's not until you realize how deep sin runs that you realize how amazing grace actually is. And I
yeah,
think one example from the Bible that really exhibited that is actually Paul, right? Like you wouldn't naturally think of Paul initially to be like, oh my gosh, look at how mature he is. He wrote half the New Testament, but how do we kind
right,
of see it? Toward the beginning of his ministry, I think he was writing the letter to the Ephesians. He says this phrase. He says, "Hey, you know what? I am the least among the saints." So there's one level of humility there. You know what? Here's some great saintly people, and yeah, I understand. I just started this all off, and I'm kind of down here. I'm at the bottom of the saints. But when he gets to the end of his life and he's writing his pastoral epistles to Timothy and Titus, in Timothy, I think it's First Timothy 1:15. Um, Paul's writing this and he says to Timothy that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, among whom I am the foremost. So it goes from I am
yeah,
the least of all the good people to saying I'm the greatest of all the bad people, right? So how much more aware is Paul at the end of his life of how great of a sinner he is? And just
mm,
imagine if you're that aware of your sinfulness and consider yourself the greatest, the chief amongst the sinners, and experience that grace of God, how much more do you think he's willing to extend that to all of the others that come across him? Where do we see that even, right? Like there was a disagreement that Paul had with Barnabas, I think, right? And they're like, "Hey, guess what? There's this guy named John Mark," and Paul's like, "I don't know about this guy," and Barnabas is like, "Dude,
right,
he's a great guy." And they disagree and they split. And so Barnabas takes Mark and it's like, "Forget y'all," right? And Mark is a great guy. Guess what? He wrote one of the Gospels, right? The flip
right,
side, Paul takes Silas, also does some great things. But again, that was early on in their ministry. At the end of Paul's life, again, he's probably sitting in prison, needs some things. He's like, "Hey, guess what? Go tell Mark to come and bring me some of these things, for he's very useful." Like in ministry, you see
yeah,
again, like this reconciliation aspect that comes again. maybe, I'm divinely speculating here that maybe there's part of that that just came from a growing awareness of our sinfulness and the greatness of God's grace. But you really see that sometimes in the writings of the life of Paul. That's what really came to mind at the moment.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a there's like a humility and there's a different perception of people
Hmm.
and the way you could see the character of Paul obviously change from Saul to Paul.
Yeah.
Like how would he have treated that same situation years before, right? Like he probably would have chopped everybody's heads off, right? Like it's one of those things where it's like complete 180, right? Probably not because, you know, it's a priest or whatever. It's like it's one of those things, right? Like you see the character difference and how you treat people and how you even handle situations. I think even going back, like maybe the original question is like you probably want to dive into our testimonies and how we've evolved, right? But like to get to not that we are or we've arrived anywhere, right? Because I think when we talk about spiritual maturity, it's not talking about becoming perfect, right? It's becoming more like Christ.
Hmm.
And I think that's the one thing where I'm constantly reminded of like what pushed me personally to even strived into getting into any kind of ministry because I've always had this like imposter syndrome. Like I didn't go to seminary, or like I wasn't as talented musically like my brothers or brother, not Joel, but I've got two brothers. One is musically. He played the congas. Okay, so I don't
Joel
I don't
killed
count
the
that.
Congas, man.
He did good at that. He had the gloves. You remember that? Um, anyway, but like I always felt like, and he did go to like Bangalore, right? Like he went to serve the Lord. Like he went across the world, right? And so I always felt like this inadequacy, but at the same time, it's like, wait, why is it? It's because like I wanted to get to know who Jesus was. And I think that's probably, if I could pass along anything practically, it's like, how much do you really want to know who Christ is? I think
Hmm.
about this like quote from John Stott, where I was reading something about like how like your vision of who Jesus is really going to shape how much you change personally.
Hmm.
And I think there's a quote where he says, "We are pygmy Christians because we have a pygmy Christ."
Hmm.
And pygmy in the sense of making something so insignificantly small. It's like, well, why are we not growing as Christians? Because what we've made of Christ is so small.
Wow.
And like, if I actually got to know him more and more and more and more, and like, it's not just like understanding the theology, but it's like literally, wait, if I get closer to him, the way I treat people is differently. Even the people that hurt me, man, I think of so many stories of like church fights, politics, all these kind of things that people have been really burned by. And the way I approach, even being in some of the same situations, the way I respond to some of those situations and people who may have been in the same situation are very different. And not to boast in anything, but it's literally because like now I'm viewing it differently through Christ's lens, right? Man, like all these dumb church politics stuff are so dumb. Like when I think about how it's really hurt people, I think back to a testimony I heard when we did a fundraiser for Bombay Teen Challenge.
Hmm.
And one of our speakers was a woman who was sex trafficked by her cousin. And she came out and gave her testimony. Dude, that was like one of the most mind blowing things because not only did she come across the world, gave her testimony, help save all these children. You know what she did? She went back to her cousin that sold her into slavery and told them that she forgives them.
Wow.
And I thought about that. I'm like, and somebody wants to argue and hold a grudge over, I don't know, some dumb thing in some church politics thing in America that has
Yeah.
no significance whatsoever. I always think back to that story. I'm like, wait a minute. How do you not understand forgiveness and grace and all these kind of things when these kind of things are actually happening in our world?
Yeah.
And we hold that grudge, right? Like it's a different perspective on all of life when we see who Christ really is, you know?
Yeah. And maybe just like you said, even with that story, right? Like you lose sight of actual problems happening when we're
Yeah.
just so consumed with our own small little churches and kingdoms. But maybe even a practical step again is maybe to step outside and just see what's going on. And, one of the things that we did years ago is we took this mission trip to Delhi, which I know we brought back to this podcast a few times. But on that mission trip in Delhi, we went to a leper colony. Is it a
Oh,
little colony of lepers? It basically was a place where they were treating leprosy in India. And again, like this is biblical concept I've heard of, but I've never actually seen lepers, right? So we went to this place and I think we served them food, if I'm not mistaken, right, Joby? But one of the things that
yeah.
they needed there was a toilet, right? Like I don't think they had a properly built bathroom or anything. And I remember we came back from that mission trip and more than figuring out like, who's gonna play songs on this Sunday, what's gonna happen, in the church parking lot and blah blah blah. It was just really like, how do we make a bathroom for these people that we
Yeah.
met in India? Because that's like the only thing we need to do right now, right? Like forget everything else. That's what we gotta do. We gotta take care of the widows and the orphans, right? Like that's true
Yeah.
religion. And you don't really see that unless you put yourself to actually experience what they're going through. And it will definitely shape your perspective into maturity.
Man, that's such a. You know what? I think back to before that trip, there was a sign up sheet,
Yeah.
and people were like not signing up. And because we were like afraid of like, oh man, it's all these uncles and aunties, they're all going to be super strict and all these kind of things. And like we had this expectation of what it would be. But then you're there, right? And then you see that and you come back. Man, I was just watching some videos because my son was like going through Google Photos. And I don't know, I put in truck in Google Photos and then it showed up all these pictures of trucks. But then I found a video of all of us in the back of a tractor.
Yeah.
And we were just like hanging out. And my son's like, where's the roof? Like, how are you guys? Where's your seats? And I'm like, there
Where's
are
the
no seats,
seat
man.
belts, man? It's not there at all.
There was no seat belts. Pastor KJ was actually yelling. He's like, seat belts? There are no seat belts. And we were bouncing around. But like, man, the experience of that, like to actually experience all of that, like perfectly said, like we just have to put ourselves out there. So like, for anybody who's listening to all of this and you're like, man, how do I grow spiritually? It's like, do I go to seminary? Do I not? It's like, how do you get closer to Christ? Like, are you part of a small group? Are you doing the spiritual disciplines? Do you have like a mentor? Do you have, discipleship? Are you part of a local church and like actually serving? Like, I love just like even trying to lead something, right?
Yeah.
Just put yourself out there. All of these things are going to prune you, right? Like into becoming who Christ wants you to be, not to be like this big famous person. That's not
Yeah.
the measure of spiritual growth, but it's like, how do we still get closer to Christ? Man, lots of great memories.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's more, right? Like, it's not that we've arrived anywhere. It's literally like, this is the sliver on the timeline that we're at. And like, there's a lot more to go. I'm sure 20 years from now, God willing, we'll look back at these recordings. And we're like, why did we put this on the internet? First of all. And then, second of all, it's like, wait, what dumb thing did we say in this podcast that we were totally theologically wrong about? But at least
Oh,
we're putting it out there and like, it forces us to like help try to get us closer to Christ, right? Like that's the bottom line.
oh,
So
100%.
yeah. Love the question. I love the prompt for us to kind of go down this like memory lane. And more practically, I would love to hear, for those of you still listening, please send us like your questions, what you're wrestling with, like how do you want to grow spiritually? Where do you want to get to? Where do you think you should get to? We'd love to have the dialogue. And if there's anything that we can help along the way, I know many of you reached out on other episodes. Please continue to do so. That's what we're here for. Happy to help. And like that's where we grow community, right? Is like these conversations. And so great episode, Jeswin. Loved this look back on how we've grown. Physically, probably not. My son's already said he's going to get taller than me in like the next maybe 2 years. He's 5. So
Man.
who knows? Yeah, he's already burning me, man. He's got that sense of humor. But yes, love to see like how we could continue to spiritually grow, right? Like that's the focus. So we will check in with you guys on the next episode, and please keep the comments coming and then like the ideas on topics. We'd be happy to dive into it.
Yeah. And put some rims on it.
DM us for context. All right. See you, Jeswin.